Welcome to Newshour. President Trump's worldwide trade tariff campaign is shifting gears and he's showing no signs of slowing down. The 47th US president has proposed a 25% tariff on all car imports, igniting fears across the global auto industry. Well, the policy set to take effect on April the 2nd aims to supercharge domestic manufacturing. But for automakers outside US borders, it's a financial roadblock that could reroute billions in trade. Industry giants are bracing for impact. Concerns abound across countries including the UK, Mexico, Canada, Japan, and Central Europe. Well, tonight we'll get reaction from both the US and the UK, but first, let's head to Hungary's capital, Budapest, where our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez has been looking at the potential impact to Central Europe. Pablo, great to see you there. Bring us up to speed then. Hungary, of course, is a major car exporter, and like Slovakia, Slovenia, it has an economy with a significant degree of dependence on the auto industry, doesn't it?
That's right. Well, these tariffs could hit Central Europe very, very hard. Hungary, Slovakia, and Slovenia are all deeply tied to the auto industry. Hungary's currency, the forint, is already at a two-year low, and the National Bank of Hungary warns that protectionist measures could further weaken growth and drive inflation even higher. Inflation today in Hungary is at 5.7% year on year. This is twice the EU average. Now, let's talk about Slovakia. You mentioned that in your intro. Slovakia is in an even riskier position. It's the EU's leading car exporter to the United States per capita, producing luxury SUVs like the Porsche Cayenne, Volkswagen Touareg, and the Audi Q7. A 25% tariff could cut deep into one of the country's biggest industries. Automotive accounts for nearly half of Slovakia's industrial output. Now, that's a major economic shock. You mentioned also Slovenia. Well, it's a smaller country. It's just as vulnerable. Every European car contains Slovenian-made components, and exports to the United States, listen to this, have surged 27% in the past 3 years. Now, with uncertainty mounting, manufacturers are scrambling to secure alternative markets, with all three countries looking east. They're looking at China. Now, the stakes couldn't be higher, and the region could face a slowdown that would ripple far beyond the auto sector.
Pablo, the Hungarian forint has already fallen over 8% against the euro this year, making it Central Europe's worst performing currency. Assuming that these tariffs do indeed kick in as planned, it's not an ideal situation, is it, to brace for an economic storm that's coming on the horizon?
That's right, an economic storm. And let me tell you what Hungary has been doing. They've been actively addressing these challenges posed by these impending U.S. tariffs. Prime Minister Viktor Orban recently announced that Hungary and the United States are working on an economic cooperation package aimed at precisely bolstering the Hungarian economy and mitigating potential losses from the tariffs. Now, additionally, Hungary is urging the European Union to engage in a direct discussion with the United States to address the car import tariffs, emphasizing the need for a collaborative approach to protect the region's vital sector. Now, despite these steps, the situation remains highly complex.
Pablo Gutierrez for us there in Budapest. Thank you very much indeed. Well, the UK is another country where concerns are heightened. Car-related manufacturing contributes over £20 billion to the UK economy. It provides more than 800,000 jobs, and 80% of all cars produced in the UK are exported overseas. Well, to dig into the detail a bit further, I'm joined now by A News's Phil Churm in the UK and by our Washington correspondent, Ube Sharbanda, who, as usual, is on the other side of the Atlantic. Gentlemen, thanks very much indeed for joining me, Phil and Ube. Ube, let's start with you. I've asked you this many times before on this programme to try and give us a glimpse inside the mind of President Trump. Where do you think his thinking is specifically when it comes to the auto industry?
Yeah, I mean, President Trump, both on the campaign trail and ever since he's taken office, has really focused in on bringing back the manufacturing sector in the United States, which has been essentially eroded in the past 40 years. And at the center of American manufacturing is auto manufacturers, with so many of those auto manufacturers based in Michigan, that American swing state that President Trump won handedly, but which lies right across the Canadian border. We've seen President Trump making a number of promises to auto worker unions and to manufacturing companies that he will use tariffs to ensure that cars that are sold on the American market are manufactured in the United States. Why? That means more American jobs. And so we saw this big announcement by President Trump that he's going to put a 25% tariffs on all auto parts and cars that are produced overseas. That means that would also include American brands that produce cars overseas and sell them to the American public. And that is meant to essentially bring back American auto manufacturing back to the homeland, and which would be believed by many supporters of the Trump administration, which would then catalyze and revitalize the American manufacturing sector. Now, let's remember that President Trump had had conditioned previous tariffs and had delayed them by over a month to allow auto manufacturers that even those that produce cars at home in the U.S., they depend on a global supply chain to provide auto parts. Otherwise, what will happen? That would significantly increase the prices of otherwise affordable cars that the American public purchases. So certainly this tariff is going to really impact foreign car manufacturers such as Ferrari that are on the higher end, or Audi. And of course, President Trump, a number of instances in press conferences, and has really also focused his ire on the Germans, Germany being a massive auto manufacturing powerhouse in Europe. The American president saying that the Germans are not giving the same market access to American manufacturers as the United States does in terms of importing German cars and other manufactured products. So in the words of President Trump, this is about leveling the playing field. So this is a big political moment for President Trump, and it's certainly going to have a massive economic impact as well, and was going to force the hand of many manufacturers that sell their cars to this huge American market, and will further incentivize them to bring that production back to the U.S. Of course, it's going to be a bumpy road, given the very ambitious plan that the president has for revitalizing American manufacturing.
Yeah, a bumpy road, Phil. I'd like to bring you in now. The UK economy, the UK government, in fact, is trying to deal with a lot of crises at the moment. They're on this quest for stability, for growth. This doesn't really help Sir Keir Starmer, does it?
No, it really doesn't. It's come at an interesting time. The context of this is quite significant. If we look only yesterday, the UK's Office for Budget Responsibility, which is the organisation that monitors the government's spending plans, and that unveiled its latest economic forecasts for the UK. Significantly, it downgraded its earlier predicted growth for this year from 2% to 1%, and that in itself is potentially worrying. And although it did upgrade the estimated growth for the next 4 years, it means that money is already tight, the economy is not flowing as much as it should be, and the kind of things that the UK government really wants to do in the next few years, that it has a mandate to be able to do these things, is going to be tight. Now, yesterday, in her spring statement, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, she outlined some of the great big plans that she had, the huge ambitions that she has, like building houses across the UK, increasing the defence budget of 2.2 billion, an extra £1 billion should be going towards helping people find jobs and get back into work. But what it means in order to be able to do that is that there would be huge cuts, at least £4.8 billion from welfare benefits, and that hasn't gone down well, even with some of her own Labour colleagues. Let's remember that the US in all of this is a major trading partner, and that the UK can well do without some kind of transatlantic trade war at this time. So what's going on to be able to try and alleviate that? Talks are taking place between the UK and the US on perhaps trying to avoid some of the tariffs. They're ongoing. And the Trade Secretary of the UK, Jonathan Reynolds, he was visiting Washington last week to discuss some kind of economic deal that they could perhaps try and sort out to be able to soften the blow of all of this. But he hasn't managed an exemption for the UK on steel tariffs, which when he tried to go over there earlier this month to be able to do that. So there are question marks as to how effective some of those talks are going to be. Keir Starmer is also having direct talks with the US president. It's something that he can do because the UK is not part of the European Union, so he can talk directly with them about what kind of special relationships they can pull out, what kind of ongoing deals the US can have with the UK. But it's a tough time, it's tricky, money's tight, they can do without this right now.
Yeah, they certainly can. Ube, at the risk of being annoying, I'm going to ask you to stick your neck out and give us another prediction. Just a few days ago, we heard about these tariffs. We now know that April the 2nd is the date when the car tariffs are due to be imposed. But what are the chances of these tariffs not happening or being cancelled soon after they're applied?
I think certainly there is a likelihood for perhaps some exemptions, and President Trump has kept that door open. And we've seen that in the past when these massive manufacturers like GE and Ford, speak and sit down with President Trump's economic advisors, telling them, hey, look, we may need some exemptions down the line just to fix the supply chain and to ensure that, these auto parts that we need to keep our factories going don't become exorbitantly expensive, and then we have to pass that cost down to the consumer. So we've seen President Trump listen to his economic advisors in the past when some exemptions have been required. But look, President Trump himself has said that April 2nd is going to be, and I quote, Liberation Day. And you have to take this president at his word, particularly when it comes to tariffs. By his account, his favorite word in the American dictionary. Look, President Trump just posted on social media earlier that, quote, for years we have been ripped off by virtually every country in the world, both friend and foe, but those days are over. And that was in all caps. So this isn't just political positioning by the American president. This is a core promise that he made on the campaign trail. This is a promise that he's made in almost every televised speech that he's made, and engagements with reporters. And this is one of the reasons that he believes that he won this election so decisively. I mean, just to give you another example, earlier in the day, the president's social media had posted a testimony by one of those auto workers in Detroit, that American city that used to be the center of the world's auto manufacturers, but has since fell on hard times with many of those plants closing. President Trump wants to bring those auto plants back to Detroit, back to Michigan. And they quoted one of the auto workers saying that we welcome these tariffs. It's going to be an excellent thing for the auto industry here in the U.S. So President Trump really looking to the blue-collar workers, particularly those in Detroit and Michigan that voted for him, and that he wants to, that he made them a promise and that he was going to keep that promise. But certainly you can probably expect that there is going to be some economic leniency if particularly those tariffs impact the supply chains of those auto manufacturers. But like President Trump said, April 2nd, Liberation Day, so you can certainly expect the president to follow through on most of those tariff promises. But of course, the other time, President Trump has said that he is willing to negotiate further with these countries, both in the EU, with the UK, and with China. Remember that China's deadline for finding somebody to sell, to divest TikTok to, that's coming up in early April as well. And that's also going to impact tariff negotiations with President Trump. So President Trump wants these tariffs not only to protect manufacturing, but also to renegotiate existing deals. And that's going to certainly put a lot of pressure on these countries in the EU, the UK. It's not in the EU, so that gives the UK additional leverage, and with China and with South Korea, another major auto manufacturer, to try to negotiate better deals with President Trump. President Trump, as he's always said, is the negotiator in chief and is always looking to make better deals. Liberation Day, by President Trump's account, coming up in just a few short days.
And Phil, that leniency that Ube spoke of there is certainly something that Sir Keir Starmer will be hoping materialises. The car industry is very important to the UK economy, tens of billions of pounds, we've heard the numbers, but it's also symbolic, isn't it? Emblematic of industrious Britain at its best, you might say. A damaged or failing auto sector tends to hurt politicians more than other sectors.
I think that's absolutely true. As you said, about 4 out of 5 of all cars made in the UK are exported. And the industries that could be most affected by tariffs include things like Jaguar Land Rover, well-known international name. In the US alone, they sold almost 120,000 vehicles last year. They immediately saw a drop in their shares when it was formally announced yesterday that this was going to happen, as did Aston Martin, whose shares dropped almost 9% at one point. Now, these are seen as being the luxury car market, but they've always done quite well in the United States. Aston Martin is actually quite a small company, but a sizable section of the sizable proportion of the cars that they manufacture do go to the United States. But as you indicated, this could certainly hurt politicians. It could hurt the government quite significantly, because the car industry has been seen as being a flagship sector. It's very often tied to the identity of Britain and the kind of post-war economic recovery, and many of those best-known names are associated with that. Traditionally as well, and this is where the real politics comes into it, car manufacturing is also seen as being an industry where there are well-paid, quite skilled jobs in what are known as red wall or often marginal constituencies. Red wall constituencies are those which tend to vote Labour, which is the current government that's in power. So traditionally, voters would in areas where there is that type of industry are traditionally Labour voters, not exclusively, but often. So something like a factory closure or major problems or reductions in output would certainly swing votes and lose them votes in any election, whether it's a local election or a national election. But it's not just about the voting patterns of the people who work in these industries. It also affects foreign direct investment. So companies like Nissan, Toyota, BMW, and Stellantis, they invest very heavily. Let's remember, for example, Stellantis, although it's a company that's seen as being European-based, it actually owns Jeep and Wrangler, which are in the United States. So there is an international impact on that. They invest very heavily in the UK, and a decline in there could send out signals, could send out red flags that the UK is maybe less competitive in its kind of post-Brexit existence, and it could undermine the idea of that global Britain, the kind of marketing concept that Keir Starmer and the Labour government would like to be able to project in the time that they're in power. So, yes, losing a car industry is far, far more visible and symbolic than many other industries, probably most other industries, and voters notice that.
They do indeed. Gentlemen, we appreciate your contribution. As always, Obey Sharbanda in Washington and Phil Churm in the UK, many thanks indeed for your analysis. Well, that is all we have time for on this edition of Newshour. Please do check out anews.tv to keep up to date with the very latest news and analysis. And from all of us here in Baku, thank you for watching.